forever for doing that. So, welcome to Design in the Trenches, the changing role of the everyday designer. And the key word in the sentence is everyday, because this is a very big thing. We have this new term, and I didn't just invent this for GDC, or I kind of did, but it is a major term, and I'm going to answer the million-dollar question today, which is what is an everyday designer? And then one note as a spoiler, in the nature of Sid Meier's talk yesterday, interesting decisions, I am going to give you an interesting decision today because this talk has two endings and you will have to choose which ending you want. There you go. It's a bit of fun. So, well, I'll do the quick introduction. Who am I? I am Rob Davis. I'm a designer on a good day. I used to work at Pandemic Studios, and you might know a bit about it. I worked at the Australian studio, then the LA studio. But don't worry about it, it's on Twitter, because now I'm at Microsoft, and that's a lot of fun because we get to make Natal games, which is very, very interesting. So, what else can I tell you about myself? Yes, I have a very unusual accent. It's not American at all. I grew up in Australia. If you're anything like the rest of the people I've met from America, you probably don't know that much about Australia, but you do know that it's full of maniacs, and we have a delicious beefy breakfast spread called Vegemite, and we're all convicts. So. What else can I tell you? I worked on a bunch of games, and most importantly, most of these games had really big design teams. So, 3 of them shipped, and they're really cool. If you check them out, you'll have a good time with them. Most recently, I was on Saboteur. That was a game with, I think we had like 18 or 19 designers on it. We had a team of about 200 when I think all was done, including internal and external people. About 100 people on the show floor, so big, big, big team. And that's a big theme today. And then one of them didn't ship, and it was cancelled. How sad. But the reason I bring this up is because it's got some interesting talking points, and we're going to talk a bunch about that today. I can't talk too much about what the cancelled title was, but I will say that it was from like a major movie license, so I'll leave you to speculate what that was. So why am I talking to you? Well, let's do the audience participation thing, okay? So who can tell me who this guy is? Anyone? Thank you, and we'll go through the gamut. Kojima, right? John Carmack, and Rob Pardo. All together now, this is... Thank you very much. So what do these guys all have in common? These guys are like the Super Marios of games design, right? So these guys are like the luminaries. You're used to hearing from them at GDC. They're really cool. They're really interesting. They have a ton to say, and they always save the day. Then sometimes we're used to hearing from like the meat and the muscle of games design, like the producers. So you're used to hearing from those guys as well. But today I am going to mix it up because you get to hear from the Goomba, and that's me. So why is this a good thing? Like, why did they greenlight this talk? Why do they want me actually talking to you? The point is actually to give you the bottom-up perspective of what designers do. And hopefully in the process I can give you some tips to make your designers happy. I can give you some tips to make your designers successful. I teased it before. What is the everyday designer? So I'll reveal it now. It's not these guys. Though they may be adorable. God bless. What is a games designer? I did some very extensive research on this. I looked for about 5 minutes on Wikipedia. I typed in games designer, and the first thing that came up was Eric Zimmerman's quote, which I actually really like, so I didn't bother looking for a second one. It is a person who designs gameplay, conceiving and designing the rules and structures of a game. This is a very, very good definition, actually. He's done a very nice job on it, but I think what he's talking about is Will Wright. Okay, so this is really cool, because I talked about this. We want to be luminaries. We want to be guys like Will Wright, but here's the reality of designers. So this is me. Yeah, this is the Goomba. This is me. What am I doing? Like, I'm sitting there with an artist. We're trying to fix a problem. If you look at all the yellow text, this is during Destroy All Humans. If you look at all the yellow text, it's all debug information. And what are we doing? We're trying to fix some particles. So in a lot of ways, we were actually trying to tighten up the graphics. We know this much. The role of the designer is evolving. It's not just like the Will Wrights anymore. And the thing, if you've worked in big teams before, you're probably asking like, we have like 15 or 18 designers on our project. Why the hell do we need all these guys? Well, I'll give you the quick and dirty answer. It's because of this. This was last gen. We had 3 major platform holders and a monopoly in the handheld space. We had PC gaming kind of tied to a rig. And this was very predictable. As designers, we like this. This was very nice because we knew how to make games for these systems. We could do it in like under 2 years, and we could do it on time, and we were doing it on budget, and we're doing very, very nicely with this. But this is current gen. This was looking okay. We thought we knew how to deal with this. But then we sort of mixed up the handheld space a lot, and we threw the iPhone in just for good measure, just to screw everyone up. And then we added a whole bunch of like digital platforms as well. And like now we have like the PSP digital platform, we have the WiiWare digital platform, we have like a DSiWare digital platform. This is getting very confusing already. Plus, as if that wasn't enough, we threw in some proprietary platforms just for kicks. I mean, I don't know how to design a game for these. I don't know who does. And then, to layer on top of that, we threw Facebook into it. So, I mean, you kind of have to excuse designers if they start feeling a bit like this. So, really, the moral is there's a lot of different designers doing a lot of different things over a lot of different projects right now. And it's really hard to define. But if I give you the easy answer, it's that designers are building levels. So they're doing this in like Max or Maya or in an editor. They're placing down props. They're building mesh. They're putting in particles. Yeah, all this sort of thing, right? Putting in triggers, all this. They're scripting. They're probably using like Lua or Kismet, something like that. Or they're tuning systems. So this looks pretty good. Like, I think this is pretty manageable. But here's the reality of what designers are actually doing in day-to-day teams. So this is a whole lot of everything. Like, they are scripting AI behaviors. They're prototyping features. They're brainstorming. They're evangelists. What does evangelist even mean? It's so confusing. They're creating sound hooks. They're putting cameras into games. There's a lot of that's a lot of everything. So the answer I really came to is that an everyday designer in a big company is just anyone who uses tools to craft fun and exciting game content. Okay? So what does this mean? Well, it means that the role's scaling. It means, as I said before, we don't have like 2 or 4 designers on a project anymore. We're starting to get really, really big numbers. It's definitely becoming more specialized. All that stuff on the list that I just showed you, all totally valid jobs to hire for. If you need a guy to tune for cameras in the game, God of War, they'll hire like a bunch of guys just to tune cameras in the game. It's definitely becoming more implementation-based. And as I found out, I talked a bit about it before when pandemic shut down, I found out that it's really different from company to company, because when I had to interview at all these companies, and see, these are some of the guys that I talked to, and they're really nice guys, and they're really interesting, and I was applying at a systems designer role, which seems like a pretty specialized role, but it turns out they all want different things from one another. What Blizzard wanted was very different from what Bungie wanted, was very different from what Relic wanted, and like it's pretty exhausting. So what does this mean for you? Really, like that's the big thing. It's really depressing, because I'm standing up here, you come to GDC, you come to get inspired, and I'm telling you you're about to become a cog in the machine. And like, it's not going to change, because these teams are getting, I'm sorry, it's getting really big. This is the only way we know how to build really, really big blockbuster games. It is moving towards that sort of film industry model. And what can we do? Well, we can try and buck the trend. And I thought about this because as designers, we're very like anti-authoritarian. We don't like working for the man. This is why we don't work in banks, and this is why we don't work in IT companies, because we like the idea of being creative, and we don't want to like work for, big hierarchies and big structures. But I can tell you firsthand, and we'll talk about this a bit later, like it will make you really, really unhappy to try and buck the trend. So what else can you do? You can go Indian. This is a very valid thing to do right now. I thought about doing this, but I have tried growing a beard before, and it's always so patchy, it looks shit. And then I just figured there's really no point in being an indie guy unless you can grow an indie guy beard. Plus I'm Jewish, and my parents aren't going to fall for that. So what else can I tell you? After a long time, I just sort of started to accept the fact that a lot of cogs make the engine run, and this is the only way we can really build big blockbusters. I think the tipping point for me was when I was talking to one of my producers, and he said to me, Rob, it's not always about you. Well, this was very confusing to me. I never really thought of it in this term before, and my response immediately to him was, I am a designer! I am trying to make this game better. I am trying to make the gameplay better. And his response was, no, you're a mission designer. Try to just focus on the missions. So really what I found out is how we navigate these big teams as designers and people who work around designers is really changing. And what I mean by that is, there's a whole bunch of little invisible rules that I had to find out the hard way by going through this over the last few years. And as we know from designing games, invisible rules are really bad. If you have grenades that have huge splash damage and the player gets killed by them, first thing they're going to say is, that felt totally arbitrary. Why didn't you tell me that grenades have these huge splash damage? Why didn't you give me a tutorial? Why didn't you tell me this information? Invisible rules, they're very, very frustrating. But I am going to try and give you the tutorials. I am going to try and give you the tutorials for the invisible rules, all the things that I found out over the last few years. And the first one is momentum. Momentum is this huge, big, invisible rule. And it's this really broad term. What is momentum? Because it's it's traction, it's energy, man, it's ethereal, it's just something, it's a feel. But that's not helpful at all. So the question you're really trying to wonder is, how do I get traction? Because when there's traction and when there's energy, you can really get a lot of buy-in from the team. So the only thing I could really come to is you kind of have to work the system, especially in these really big teams. And I had a lot of trouble with this because I like working in the 6-person design teams. And when we started to become 16-person design teams, I liked being able to wax philosophical with my lead designer or our creative director and stuff. This was very unusual for me because it wasn't just our design team that had scaled, the whole team had scaled. And so I couldn't get sign-off for anything I was trying to do anymore. I needed my boss to sign off on all these features. So I'd go in, I'd try to wax philosophical with him for an hour, and we'd come out and we'd have nothing done. But fortunately, a show came along that inspired me. Entourage. Now, this is a very good show, and I think anyone who is a designer will like this show a lot because it's very egotistical, okay? But there is one big lie to Entourage. The big lie of Entourage is that Vinny Chase is the star of the show, and this is not true at all. The big lie is that Ari Gold is the star of the show, and I got really inspired by Ari. Like, I really started to think about Ari because I started to ask, like, what would Ari do? And the reason is because he gets everything down to concise design. He gets it down to a 30-second pitch. He goes in there and he can sell you in under 30 seconds. And this was like, I started looking at the place he works, which is, in the show, it's based on Creative Arts Assembly, which is this like huge machine in LA. And they have hundreds of people. So everyone's like getting really good at getting their point across in under 30 seconds in this show. And I realized that when I was asking for resources, when I was asking for resources on a feature, when I was asking for resources for animation, for art, for code, what I was really doing was having to sell. And I also worked out that if you're good at selling, you can sell anything. Okay? But I decided to use my power for good rather than evil. And I noticed one thing. All the people that I was asking for resources, they fell into one of three categories. Okay? It was either producers, directors, or leads. So what do these three people have in common? Anyone want to take a guess? Close. That's pretty good, actually. I don't mind that. Okay, the thing I found, they all love lists. They love lists of stuff. And on Saboteur, I really tried to change my style to turning my production brain on a lot. I was like, what can I give these people that they can use? How can I get through the sign-off procedure so fast? So this is one of our ones from Saboteur. And the big thing here is nothing here is an opinion. It is all facts about what the game is showing us. There is nothing about what the game should feel like. There is nothing here about what I believe as a designer is the wonderful design for this game. It is all clambering is broken on this tank. It is all that. It's really factual. And what else? It's all laid out so that all the producer needs to do is put it into the bug tracking system or into the task tracking system. So in a lot of ways, like I was kind of like helping them out and like sort of giving them a high five so that they could make it actionable as soon as possible. And that really helped out. And what I really learned is it wasn't just about having an idea anymore. My rough transition to NextGen told me it was actually about pitching and selling. So what else can I tell you? What are the other invisible rules about momentum? Archimedes, this is a very smart guy, by the way. He knows a lot of stuff. And he says, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, I shall move the world. I think what he's actually talking about here is, like, you can be a small cog, but you can make huge changes, even in a design team. Even in a huge team, you can still make big changes. I want to talk for a minute about gameplay pods, because gameplay pods are very, very good at doing this. Because what I mean by gameplay pods is it's a bunch of people, like, working on the same feature across different departments. So it's like an artist, an animator, programmer, designer, like, all working together. This is very good in general because it helps everyone to understand the tech. It helps everyone to understand what's going on. And it also builds gameplay consensus, which is really nice. And also, like I mentioned before, like I can't get 15 minutes with my boss's boss anymore. So these are my bounce-off guys now. These are the guys that I talk to on a daily basis. But the biggest lesson that Archimedes can tell you about this is that cogs in tandem build a hell of a lot more momentum than individuals. So this is a lot easier to understand with an example. This is our combat from Saboteur. And the big goal of the combat from Saboteur was to get it feeling like Call of Duty controls, right? We know a pandemic that we make like mainstream games. We know that we weren't like making the next BioShock. We knew that we weren't like, our goal was really to get to the heart of the mainstream because that's what we were really good at in the PS2 days. So the focus was to get it feeling like to feeling like COD. And what this really means is like, he's doing nice things. He's like taking cover. The enemy down there, he's like taking partial cover. The camera's in a nice place. The rate of fire on the gun's pretty good. It's got blood on the screen like Call of Duty's. But the thing is, it didn't always feel this way. Actually, it felt terrible like up until about like 9 months before ship. But the change didn't come from up above. The change came from below. And it was actually this jerk. So this guy is a guy called Mike Marzola. If I continue the analogy of cogs, he's like the loudest cog in the whole machine, right? Every time this cog turns, it creaks and it moans and stuff, right? And this, but he would tell you that himself. And then this is our AI coder. And like he is our brightest cog. He is our shiniest cog. He can do all these sorts of things with code that make it wonderful. So these guys should be a terrible fit together, right? Like you don't want to pair these guys up together. Wrong. These guys are an awesome fit together. Why are they an awesome fit together? Because they have the same vision and they have the same like feel that they want to get out of the controls. They want the grenades to feel like Killzone. They want the cover to feel like Gears of War. They want the animation to feel like Uncharted. I think everyone wants their animation to feel like Uncharted. But anyway. So these are the games these guys were playing at home and, bouncing off with each other. And something really unusual happened. Like, when we, pumped them full of a whole bunch of coffee, we saw this. And that's really nice. That's really nice when it happened. But it didn't happen just between them. It happened with, sort of the team around them. It sort of started to spill out to everyone else. So, all the animators would go over to these guys and ask them, how should my hit reactions look versus this gun? How should, how should we do our, shotgun hit reactions, for example? And then, the effects guys would go over and they would say, well, how do you want your grenade effects to look? And there was this, really big dialogue just between these two guys. I was tuning the game economy at the time, right? So I needed to work out when all the weapons were going to unlock in which order. So I needed to go to these guys and find out which is the more powerful pistol. Is it the Mauser or is it our version of the revolver? And all this sort of thing. So what really happened is these guys started steering it. And, the result was clear. Our players did actually start saying, we love the COD controls. I want to make something really clear here. This isn't about, usurping the director. This isn't about, going around the system and, sneaking it into the build or anything about this. It's about, taking point, and it's about really building energy within the team, because the moral of the story is that energy builds momentum, and if you want your ideas in the game, momentum's a really good way to do it. I'll talk about relationships really briefly, and this is a really simple slide. All I'm trying to tell you is, if you have good relationships, people will try to help you out. They'll try to give you resources. They'll like you. If you have bad relationships, they won't. So yeah, in a weird way, you kind of have to build personal relationships. These things do matter inside big teams. And then, sometimes the rules are meant to be broken. They're there. You can go outside the system. I have a really simple example of this. We were working on an open world game in Australia. I had played tons of Crackdown and tons of open world games. In fact, I was really sick of open world games. But I did know one thing, that if you put a collectible system in open world games, you get your 30-second loop. Okay? So you get people you're trying to tell them to go from A to B, but they're zigzagging to get from A to B. They're stopping to collect an orb. Or in GTA, they're stopping to run over a hooker and pick up cash. All these little 30-second loops of collectibles is really important. But my director, he didn't see it. He didn't feel the same thing. He didn't like that idea. He thought they were too gamey. So what did I do? I stayed there on the weekend. I hacked this horrible collectible system into the game with debug text and regions and stuff like that. He picks it up, he plays it, and he's like, yeah. No, I think you're actually right. This is actually kind of cool. So in the end, I got a whole bunch of momentum behind this feature. I got my thing into the game that I wanted, and it actually started becoming part of our core loop of the game. So, the big takeaway here is there is this big invisible rule called momentum. And when you have it, a lot can happen. And it's really important to getting your ideas in the game. What is the next big invisible rule? So at this point, I thought I understood how to get through next-gen development as a designer at this point, because I understood momentum now. So I have this big invisible rule that I can use to my advantage. But I was so wrong. I was so wrong because I got slapped across the face with the biggest invisible rule that the games industry can hit you with. So this is a really big thing. And it is the invisible rule that all designers know about, but no designer will ever talk about. And it's it's bitterness. It's being in this negative funk. It's being in this negative spiral. And I really believe that it's yeah, sorry. I really believe that it's Microsoft wanted me to take that out, by the way. I really believe that it's a rite of passage for all designers. Every designer I respect and every designer that I know that I really can tell you the point where they went through this really negative funk and came out the other end of it stronger. And then you've probably met the designers who are just always in that funk. So what did I do? I did something very clever. I climbed a big mountain in Africa. But that was very expensive, and I found out that wasn't the only thing. There was tons of other little invisible rules that I found out along the way. One thing, and I'm sure a lot of designers experience this, at some point, games really start feeling like homework. And we don't want to talk about this because we're trying to be inspiring designers, and we're trying to say how much we love playing games, and no one ever wants to talk about the fact that games can actually be really exhausting and boring to play. But the only consistent feedback I can find amongst all bad designers is that they stop playing games. So somehow we have to keep playing all these games and kind of have fun with them. And this is really hard. And by the time I was finished making open world games, I think I did open world games for about 5 years. Man, I must have played 45 open world games or something. I was so sick of open world games. I really didn't want to pick up another one. But I did find out that if I played something I wouldn't usually play, like Civilization, there's a big Sid Meier theme in this talk, in case you didn't pick it up. Suddenly, I'm playing this game till 2 a.m. and I'm like, this is really good. Turns out, it wasn't me that was the problem. It was playing open world games nonstop that was the problem. I also found out from a mentor of mine, he passed along this trick to me, this invisible rule. You have to get really, really good at turning your analytical brain off, because our initial our initial reaction as designers is to sit there with a pen and paper and pick everything apart to the nth degree. But this is very, very bad. You have to learn how to turn off your inner Anton ego. And as a basic example, I was playing Darksiders over Christmas, right? And I'm working on Natal now. And Natal is very animation driven. Like, I can't talk about it too much, but it's very animation driven. So I'm really interested in what the animations are doing. I'm looking at like how animations pop and how animations blend and what kind of states they use. So I'm playing Darksiders and I'm trying to look at all this stuff. It's like, it's like so frustrating to play. But I had to remember my old rule, which is not Anton ego, inner Homer, okay? And so as soon as I looked at trying to break the game, and as soon as I stopped looking at what was under the hood, I actually started to have a lot of fun with Darksiders, and I should be, because it's totally my kind of game. It's like a Zelda game and a God of War game, and like sort of mashed together. So yes, you can get good at like just enjoying games once again. Here's a really big thing for me. Here's where I wear my heart on my sleeve. I really believe that I would have had a very, very different experience in this industry if I hadn't had a few really good mentors along the way. And if you are having trouble in the games industry, if you feel really negative right now, or even if you know someone in your team who you think is in this negative funk, I really ask you to like help them to pull out of this and really try to pair them up with a mentor or something. Because like we're really like crazy people. We're kind of all over here as designers, and mentors are very good for showing you more invisible rules, actually. There's a whole lot of invisible rules that I can't cover today, and specific to your company as well, there will be a whole lot of invisible rules, but your mentor can show you those things. So this is very good. And like also, just get some variety in your life. There's this like really, really, really good UI programmer I worked with, and he's like the triple threat. He's like a UI programmer, he's a UI artist, and he's like kind of a games designer as well. And I worked with him a lot on Saboteur, and this guy's awesome. And he goes home at the end of the day and he makes tons of Flash games and he makes tons of cool games. And his thing was, I will never be a designer because you people ruined it for me. And it turns out like he just doesn't know the invisible rules. So yeah, what did I do? Like I just had to get some dimension in my life. He said, the trouble is your profession and your hobby are the same, and it will drive you crazy if you don't actually get some dimension in your life. I like to pretend that like going to the gym was like really my thing that sort of like got me out of this, but actually it was things like magic cards, which is totally dorky. Yeah, exactly. And then, look, if you're not happy, just leave. Just go somewhere else. It's the Conan O'Brien. Yeah, and for the record, I'm with Coco. Like, F you, Jay Leno. Look, if I can sum this up really simply, designers burn out more than like anyone else in this industry. And it is quite possible you're just the next name on the list. You've got to be in this industry for a long time if you actually want to make games for a long time. And if you want to do this until you're like 60 years old, like Sid Meier or like Miyamoto or something, it's like, you've got to get through all this stuff. So you've got to pull out a negative spiral. Here is another big, big, big invisible rule that I found out the hard way. This one like slapped me right across the face. So it turns out it's not just enough anymore to be a good designer. Seems really obvious now. You actually kind of have to be a good employee as well. Like all these big companies were turning into really big organizations. And yes, what a wonderful poster that is. Oh, I'm so inspired. But I found this out the hard way. I want to give you a basic example of this. We had huge problems with tools on one of the programs. So, I mean, anyone who's transitioned from current gen to next gen has probably told you the same story. It's really hard to get stuff up in the build. It's really hard to get tools working. They crash on you all the time. It's incredibly frustrating. So here's my approach. This sucks. Yeah. Turns out people don't really like that. And what's actually worse is they don't actually know what to do with it. If you just tell them it sucks, it just becomes white noise. It's just another complaint added to the list, and it goes nowhere. But I took a second approach this time, which was to take like a 2-hour log of my user experience. So I sat down, I started looking at like more pragmatically. Again, like, okay, all these people love lists. All these people I'm trying to get to fix this stuff really love lists. How can I put this into a list for them? So I sat down, and it was like 257, tool crashes. 303, did this, tool crashes. Did this. 315, tool crashes. Suddenly, like, this became totally actionable. And I guess, like, the big takeaway there is, like, give them something they can use. Give them something that they can make actionable. And it becomes very, very helpful. The other thing is, like, designers love to rant. We love to rant. This is why we have internet forums. But it doesn't really solve the problem. I'll put this in terms you can all understand. You just got to be like this guy. And clearly I'm not that guy. Because I'm not the calm one. And I'm not like the one who's really good at like holding back sometimes. But like I have seen this guy on every team I've worked on. Like every team I work on, there is some guy who is always calm through every problem. There is some guy who always just sits back and thinks through every problem. So I can't tell you firsthand where it's worked for me, but I can tell you that I have seen it work in lots of other design teams. The big takeaway here is just like you're a passionate games designer, but we've got to start getting good at actually being employees and like human beings, because we've moved from 6 people in a design team to 16. And what this means is there's now a whole layer of HR. There's now a whole layer of process. There's now a whole layer of organization. There's all this business stuff that we don't want to have to deal with, but like we're kind of going to have to just suck it up. So the other thing I will say is the threat of losing your job in this climate is very, very real. I just went through it. Like, it is scary, and it is very tense. And I thought I was doing a really good job, but it sure doesn't matter when like the numbers come up. So what I want to say is, like, I've told you all these people like lists, and these are all the same people who do the firings. So make sure you're not on someone's list when it comes to like the firings. Look, honestly, if you don't want to make games anymore, there's plenty of guys in line, and that is the same loud designer that I showed you before. Ultimately, like, I don't know if you saw the Emmys a little while ago. James Cameron, like, stood up there and he said, "Oh, we have the best job in the world." Like, whatever, James Cameron, you're full of it. We have the best job in the world. Like, F you. So here is the third big invisible rule. This is the third and final invisible rule. I think we're going to finish early so we can all get a beer or something. This is the third big invisible rule. Being a cog is actually kind of ideal right now if you want to be a games designer. So if you take a step back and you're like, why are we designers anyway? Well, a lot of it is because we want to build stuff, we want to explore stuff, and a lot of it is like we want to grow as designers. And the thing is, specialization right now, all the stuff I showed you on the complex list, that is like your path to growing as a designer. This has never happened before, where there are practical steps you can take to become a better designer. Like 4 years ago, it was just like, the level doesn't feel quite right. The mission doesn't feel quite right. It's really ethereal. It's really hard to grow as a designer. But, well, look, every talk at GDC has talked about Uncharted, so I might as well talk about Uncharted. Imagine you're building a level on Uncharted and you want to get better at building levels. Like, if you can learn cameras, if you can learn sound hooks, if you can learn cutscenes, all these specialization implementation tasks that sort of make you a cog, then obviously these are the things that make Uncharted levels better than any other levels in the industry. Here's an example of where it grew for me. I am like, oh yeah. So this is my lead designer from Saboteur, Tom French. Now, he's like a really big Excel guy, and I was tuning the game economy in our game, amongst a bunch of other stuff. But Excel is obviously the ideal tool for tuning a huge amount of data. But like, I'm from an art background, I'm from an animation background, so I don't want to learn something like Excel. Like, it's really confusing to me, and it's like totally not my biggest thing. But I mean, Tom French, he's actually really good at selling it. And in a weird way, this actually became my biggest growth opportunity on Saboteur. I never thought I'd be an Excel guy, but I totally became an Excel guy, and I'm totally happy for it. So here's like my Excel spreadsheet from Saboteur, and it's really basic. It's totally janky, and it just has a really basic understanding of what the information is, and everything's organized, and it has some basic data in there. And then we moved a step further, and suddenly like I was getting all these macros in there, which is really cool when you're tuning an economy, because we had like 1,500 or 1,600 different ways for you to earn money across missions and stuff to blow up. So like, I could start getting it to macro across different pages, and this was very interesting. And like, when you've been through learning Excel, then you'll understand why this is exciting. But the biggest thing was, at the end of this, we got so good at it that we passed this over to QA as our beta checklist. And so we didn't have to like go to production and say, you need to build a list of all the things that QA need to be checking off before they mark this build as complete or they mark this build as beta. They could like just go to our actual design document, and we tidied it up a bunch. So for the first time in my life, production actually started to like me because I did them a solid. So really, like, specialization is actually good. I'll talk about one more big invisible rule. The worst tasks, they can actually kind of be the coolest ones, because if no one wants to do it, you can actually have like a ton of ownership over this thing. So I'll give you an example of our ambient free play system. So in the game, this is a scene from Saboteur, and like, this is one of the targets you can blow up. We knew that we wanted, I talked a bit before about like the 30-second loop, going around the world, blowing up getting crackdown orbs. In our game, they're kind of stylized a bit more because we were set in World War II. So this is a crackdown orb for all intents and purposes. I'm going to go up, I'm going to blow it up, it's going to give me cash, it's going to mark it off a list, and then we had a ton of these things, right? Like we had lots of different archetypes. They're really fun. They all give you lots of different money. They all give you lots of different rewards. They all have different damage values and stuff. By the way, they're all tuned globally, not specifically. So when it comes to bug fixing and stuff, having global values also very, very good. And in the end, this is a scene from Saboteur. Look how many Crackdown orbs there actually are. Now, this is really actually quite fun to do. And this is how many we ended up with in the game. If you buy all the maps and you turn them all on, this is how many things there are to blow up, Crackdown orbs there are to get. The catch is, there's 1,300 of those things placed down, and someone actually has to do it. So we had this junior designer come in. He sat down for 3 months. He just put his headphone on. This was he loved doing it. He really, really loved doing the shitty task that no one else wanted to do. And you know what happened? Every review consistently called it out as being one of the huge successes of the game. They all said, oh, we love going around the world, blowing stuff up. We love the Crackdown orb element. So there's a lot of dots. He was our most junior designer, but this attitude, and this, taking it on as, hey, this could actually be kind of cool. There's a lot I could do with this. Matters. So, I promised you 2 endings. Here is ending the first. So don't, clap or whatever. You can clap twice if you want. Design teams have scaled a lot. We've gone from 6 to 16. And roles are more implementation driven. I can't help this. I can't do anything about it. I love the good old days when it was less of us. But in reality, we can actually make bigger and better games having bigger design teams anyway. Teams are becoming more hierarchical. And this is really difficult for designers to deal with because we are so anti-authoritarian and we don't like the idea of working for big organizations. Momentum is king. If you can get momentum, man, you can get ideas in that game and you can cut through the noise of the organization really fast. And you will get jaded. At some point, the organization and the hierarchy, your natural design instinct, what makes you a designer, will really get frustrated by that. But you're going to have to be okay with it. And then, cogs make engines run. That's the third invisible rule. So here's my first conclusion, and you can you can have the good ending and the bad ending, like Mass Effect or something. So really, we have to be okay with being cogs, or in gamer terms. But I'm not okay with this. I'm kind of okay with it, but I'm kind of not okay with this. So I started looking a bit deeper, and I said, what if that's not enough? And I read a book over Christmas. Jamie Grismer talked about it yesterday in his talk. It's called Outliers. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. Very, very interesting book. He talks about outliers as being those who operate outside of the regular statistics. He uses the Beatles as an example. He actually uses Bill Gates as an example. And he uses hockey players as an example. And what he's really talking about is those who just don't fit into the normal understanding of achievement. All the maths is adding up one way, and they skew all the way to the left regardless. The machine or the engine is saying, here's what you are going to become, and here's what you're doing. And somehow, they skew to the left of that anyway, or they zig and they zag. So, I'm going to give you the three of the invisible rules that Malcolm Gladwell outlines in his book. And I think they're very relevant to games design. The first one he talks about is the 10,000 hour rule. And the basic principle is that to be good at anything, really good at anything, you need about 10,000 hours under your belt. What's an example he gives? He talks a lot about musicians. He says that musicians, when they're younger, they do about 6 hours of practice a week. By the time they get to about 12 years old, they're doing about 15 hours of practice a week. By the time they get to 18, if they're not doing 30 hours of practice a week, they're not going to be joining the best music schools. They're not going to be joining the biggest concertos in the world. They'll be okay, they'll be good, but they're not going to be the next, they can't become the next big thing. This is perfect for gamers, especially if you have WoW or something. You can get to 10,000 hours, no problem. I did the maths on me the other day. It came out to about 7,800 hours, so I got to get some more hours in, I guess. The second big invisible rule he outlines is the triad of autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward. It's much easier to understand if I give you an example. He talks a lot about rice paddies in China. So there's this big misconception about rice paddies. Everybody thinks that rice paddies are fields and fields and fields of rice paddies like corn, but they're not. They're the size of a hotel room. And the other interesting thing about rice paddies is it's meticulous work. You have to have the right amount of mud, and then you have to have just the right amount of soft mud above that, and then you have to have just the right amount of water above that. And then what's worse is you have to go and make sure that every bit of rice is an inch away from the last one. So this is the most exhausting process in the world. But the reason they do it is because it's satisfying to them. And this is very consistent with why we join game companies, and it's very consistent with why we do what we do. How many people have been promised a bonus and it never came through, but they were still perfectly happy with the game they worked on? How many people don't really care much for working for the man, so to speak? This is why we become games designers, because we do it for ourselves. And then the third rule he highlights is the happy accidents of history. Basically good timing. And he gives an example, which is in the 60s, I think it was, all the Jewish lawyers, I'm Jewish, so I'll use the Jewish example. All the Jewish lawyers were given the dirty work. They were given the litigation work because the WASPs didn't want to do it. It was seen as dirty work. We're not touching litigation. You have to get your hands dirty to do that. But in the 80s, everyone started suing each other. And so then this is where the concept of the Jewish lawyer came from, because these were the only guys who were good at it. The guys who had all the dirty work suddenly became the guys who were in the biggest demand. And we're on the bleeding edge of this industry, so you can't tell me that we're not ready to start taking on some big opportunities. So those are the 3 big invisible rules that Gladwell highlights. And really, you have no excuse not to be an outlier. Someone at GDC here is going to fit these rules, and they are going to skew outside of the statistics. They are going to skew outside of the cog in the machine system. And so I showed you these guys at the start, right? And my call to arms is really we have to be okay with being cogs, but if we want to be really special, don't let that stop you from being inspiring. Don't settle. Just do something amazing. That's all I got. And then if you have questions, I like the contentious questions the most. So. All right, I'm going to go get a drink. Thanks for coming.